This is the exam review video for Chapter 5. There's only one video. So as we go to look at some of the things that are going in Chapter 5, we're just going to set you up and then have you finish them up. When you're looking at the problems, especially like number 8, you want to be thinking about the types of words that mean different things for inequalities. You have your pink sheet that gives you some good ideas. You want to read through and see if you can decode, and we'll come back to that at the end of the video and see how you did. So we'll come back to number 8. But then jumping down to number 12, they ask you for two things. We practiced one in class, a verbal phrase, which means in words. So for that verbal phrase, you want to use that same sheet and see if you can come up with some of the terms that should help us. So you could have something like the sum of x and 3 to practice using that word is less than or equal to 9 and continue to write that out. Or you could try some of those other words on there about at most, at least, no more than. Two values that make this true, you may want to come along and solve this one then. And as you solve this, to help find two values that make that true, you need to list two values that satisfy that the number you state has to be smaller than or equal to 6. So, for example, two values that make that true, one value would be 4. 4 is smaller than or equal to 6 and therefore will satisfy that. You could also say 6 because 6 is equal to 6. When you give two values that make it true, you want two things that fit that final inequality. 13 and 14, when you do your steps, remember pause the video, try these out, and then come back. You want to be sure that your distribution is of the full numbers. So on 13, when you go to simplify this side, you're going to want to be sure that you distribute that -2. And then as you're solving, you want to keep in mind that solving works in the reverse of order of operations. So you want to think about SADMEPs. After you've simplified any distributing, you want to go in the opposite direction and take care of any addition or subtraction that's keeping that x from being alone. And adding and subtracting on inequalities works the same way it works on equations. So this side will be 16. When you get to the multiply and divide step to undo, you want to consider that it works the same way on equations except if you'd multiply or divide by a negative value, which I'm about to do in the process of solving this one. So when I do, the x will be alone on this side, but the inequality symbol needs to flip in order to state that relationship correctly. And that might be one big reminder you want on your note sheet. When you get to 15 and 16, you're starting to talk about compound inequalities. So you want to be thinking about ands or ors. And so on number 15, I see two regions. I can fall in this region or I can fall in this region. So when you go to give your final inequality, keep in mind that one should be an or. Like we did examples with, you either get the discount for being under the age of 5 or you get the discount for being over the age of 60. Number 16, though, needs to be an and because they're letting things be on this side of 2, but things also need to be on this side of 4. So when you're stating an and, you have two ways you can write it. You can state your two inequalities separated by the word and. The other way you can write it is to have your inequality symbol, and then we're going to have something in the middle, and then something on either side. So take a moment, pause the video, and work on those. Finally, when you look at 17 and 18, these are both ands and ors. The or is stated. So on 17, you want to solve those separately and then graph your or solution. When you get to 18, though, you want to break this up into two separate inequalities by taking what's in the middle in that box, and -7 is less than, and use what's in the middle. And here's where you begin at the other end of the box. X minus 8, that thing in common in the middle, has to be less than 2. So you're separating that into two separate inequalities. You're solving it, and please show your work so that you're doing this. So this one says that x has to be less than 10 and x has to be greater than 1. So when I come over to my number line to make this, one at a time off my number line, I want to do this. X is less than 10 would be this way. It's not my final graph. X is greater than 1 will be this way. And says that they both have to make the situation true. So when I come to my number line, I want to move my boundaries up and then anything in between because that's where they share values. So the solution I just graphed is where they're both true. As I promised, we'd go back to 9 if you took a chance to try to write that. It says a number m increased by 7 is less than the sum, they're telling me about adding two things, of 3 times a number, m, and 2. So when they say the sum, they're about to tell me that I'm about to add those. See how you can do with the rest of it? Be sure to transfer things over to your note sheet for exams.